Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Vanessa. I'm going to present, thank you, Dr. Bridget, for the wonderful presentation of the overview. I will zoom in actually quite on a micro level to the situation in Singapore, and from there we can learn a little bit more about the region. Do I press buttons here? Yeah. The green one is next. Oh, okay. Okay, I've got no disclosures. Okay, so Project X, we were established in November 2008, and we're the only rights-based organization in Singapore that provides social, emotional, and health support to sex workers, and we envision a fair and safe sex industry for everyone involved in a society that respects sex workers, their clients, partners, and families. So the conference has been very overwhelming for me. I've met many professors here, and I'm hoping to bring an NGO voice to this conference. I want to start with this poem. This is written in the collective voice of Burmese migrant sex workers and was published by Empower Foundation, which is a sex worker organization in Thailand. So I'll read this poem. It says, "If this was a story of a man setting out on an adventure to find treasure and slay a dragon to make his family rich and safe, he would be the hero. But I am not a man. I am a woman, and so the story changes. I cannot be the family provider. I cannot be setting out on an adventure. I am not brave and daring. I am not resourceful and strong. Instead, I am called illegal, disease spreader, prostitute, criminal, or trafficking victim." If you scan the QR code, it will bring you to our Instagram account where we published this poem. We published this poem, actually, republished it in 2021 on our Instagram because if you remember 2021, it was in the thick of COVID. And there was a new cluster that emerged in 2021 that sent everyone back into quarantine. And that cluster was attributed to a Vietnamese woman who worked in an underground KTV entertainment establishment. And so the vitriol was big, right? Everyone was like, oh, we thought we got COVID under control, but because of this one woman who was working in an illegal KTV, this migrant woman, and then we're all back into lockdown. And so there was a lot of hate speech towards Vietnamese women in Singapore during that time, but also that there was a lot of hate towards people in the adult entertainment industry. And so we published this post urging people to see that no human being is illegal. So very quickly, I think Dr. Bridget talked about this. There are 1.4 million migrant workers in Singapore, but what she didn't say is that this is actually 40% of our labor force. So we have a population of about 5 million people, and 40% of it is migrant workers. And they form sort of domestic work, building, infrastructure, ship repair, construction, retail, and hospitality. The statistics on sex workers are very limited. There is a network scale-up method to estimate, and there were estimated about 8,000 female sex workers in Singapore. And just from word on the ground is that there are about 800 licensed sex workers. So we do have a licensing scheme for the sex industry, which I will elaborate in a moment. There's no statistic as to how many of them are migrant workers, but we on the ground feel it's probably about 80% of the industry are made up of migrant sex workers. So I don't think I need to belabor this point, but I just wanted to share some of the interviews that we've done over the years and what are some of the reasons for migrating to Singapore for sex work. And of course, it is to make money. I think what this cisgender female street-based sex worker from China shared with us is that there are limited economic opportunities, and that if she continued to work back in China, she would have earned maybe about $750 a month, but that she could earn that money in Singapore probably in a day or two or even in a week. So yes, it's all for making money, earning more money. Another worker shared the same thing. We have responsibilities, and this is just work. I'll very briefly touch upon some push and pull factors. So push factors would be, as I mentioned, limited economic opportunities, debt. I think during COVID, we saw a lot of people's businesses fall into disarray and fall into debt. And actually, COVID actually pushed a lot of people into the sex industry as a way to earn fast money to cover some of these debts. Gender inequalities, gender-based violence, discriminations against gender and sexual minorities are also reasons why people move into the sex industry and migrate for sex work. Some pull factors, as in Singapore, strong currency from within the region, and that does definitely attract a lot of people to do sex work in Singapore. But our interviewees also do talk about rule of law, right? That there is no corruption and they feel safer walking down the streets in Singapore, and so they felt safer to do sex work in Singapore than in other countries. There's a high domestic demand for from entertainment outlets for new faces. So the entertainment establishments, the entertainment industry in Singapore is quite large, and I don't know if you've ever seen, but some of these KTV bars can have over 100 women working in them at any one point in time. And this can be staffed by both people on tourist visa, so working undocumentedly, or they could be working on a 6 months performing artist visa, which is a work visa for people in the entertainment industries. Singapore does attract a lot of international events, and so these international events attract a lot of high net worth individuals willing to engage in sexual services, and this pulls people into Singapore to do sex work. One thing that has come up as well is anonymity in doing sex work. Many of the people who do sex work in Singapore may not have been sex workers in their home countries. And that's also the same reason why Singaporean sex workers would leave Singapore to do sex work. So Singaporeans do go to Australia and Europe to do sex work. And that's because nobody in those countries would recognize them as sex workers. And they can come back to Singapore having nobody know that they've engaged in this line of work. So the same thing is true for people around the region. So if people come from Philippines, Indonesia, and they do sex work in Singapore, but actually they run their own home businesses, completely unrelated work back in their home country. So it can be very opportunistic in that sense also. I'm going to add here boyfriends, husbands, lovers. Lots of people travel, Singaporeans who go overseas to work, they might meet somebody, they might get married, so on and so forth. Anyway, so they come into Singapore. Those relationships might break down. The husbands and lovers, boyfriends might not have enough money to sustain their lovers, and their lovers might have to do sex work. Those are some other reasons for doing sex work. I don't want to go too much into this. Feel free to ask me more questions about this if you're interested. But sex work obviously is very varied. There might be just one one image of sex work that we might have of the street-based sex worker or the brothel-based sex worker. But there's actually a huge range of sex workers in Singapore, including massage parlor-based workers, entertainment venue-based, adult content creators. OnlyFans made it very famous and popular, but actually the internet has always been used for adult content. Escorting, pro-doming, sugar babies are also forms of sex work. And so they are, the legality is coded in the colors. So street-based and massage-based work, more or less, it's illegal. Entertainment venue-based, some people are illegal and some people are not. And then everything else is kind of, if the police wants to charge you, they can, but whether or not they want to is the question. And there are a handful of registered brothels in Singapore. I will show you, to add some sex worker voices into this conference. This is my ex-colleague Sherry Shakisha. She is a transgender sex worker herself. She has left Project X and is now the regional coordinator of the Asia Pacific Network of Sex Workers. So if you're in Bangkok, in Thailand, and you are looking to connect with sex workers, this is the person you're looking for. But yes, here's a quick 2-minute video.
Hey, come closer. But do you know that we have licensed sex workers in Singapore? Have you heard about the yellow card system? The police regulate and monitor a limited number of brothels. In particular, the Specialised Crime Branch of the Singapore Police Force issues licenses to brothels and provide clearance for brothel sex workers to acquire a special work permit. Sex workers in such establishments are required to undergo monthly health checks and are given the infamous yellow card. Literally, it is a yellow coloured card. Most workers under the yellow card system are migrants. They will have to undergo an interview and sign a contract with the police upon arrival. We understand that some workers were asked at this point if they have been coerced into the industry. Among other things, the agreement states that one will not break any local laws and that once their contract ends, they will face a travel ban lasting between 3 years to a lifetime. Other terms and conditions include not soliciting outside one's designated brothel, not loitering in public places, and not to have a Singaporean boyfriend. Workers under the yellow card system work full-time, up to 6 days a week, and compensation has to be provided if more of these are required. Brothels are to comply with a 100% condom use policy. However, there have been reports of unsafe sexual practices within these brothels. The state does not publicly acknowledge this. However, through our work, we managed to learn of some criterion for application of the yellow card. You have to be between 21 to 35 years of age. You cannot be Malay or Muslim. You cannot be male on your identification card. This includes pre-operative transgender persons. You have to be from a list of approved countries. An example, China, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore.
All right, so that's a quick overview of the yellow card system, also known as the medical surveillance scheme. I want to share some pros and cons of this scheme as shared by sex workers themselves. So one Malaysian licensed sex worker actually feels that she's a lot safer compared to unlicensed sex workers. She feels that there's a strict observation for safer sex, including oral sex, in the brothels, and they have to undergo mandatory health checks every month. So she says that the mandatory check allows us to know our health and helps us to remind us about safer sex. So another transgender unlicensed sex worker actually says that, if she has a license, she can pass through immigration with lesser difficulty. So without license, and I think Dr. Bridget talked about this, people who are gender diverse often get profiled and stopped at immigration borders. And so without the license, here she says, they will ask what we do here, stay where and all. They will ask a lot of questions. They will also check our phones and messages. And we've also had some transgender sex workers report to us that they have their bags searched, right? And if they carry any sex toys or if there any sexy lingerie, they will be questioned about why they will come to Singapore with those things. And people have been deported and turned around at borders for having sex toys. On the flip side, some people say that they will never want to apply for the yellow card. Firstly, they say that they have no freedom. You're stuck inside the shop all day, not allowed to go out and walk. And there's a designated time to work, designated time to get off work. So for this particular sex worker, she says, for me, when I feel like working, I work. When I don't feel like working, I don't. I get to do what I want as an unlicensed sex worker. So she's based on the street. For another interview from a transgender, unlicensed, brothel-based sex worker, she writes that we don't like to be treated like criminals. So if she's outside of the legal, of the licensed brothels, she feels like they're being treated like criminals. But the problem is actually very opaque. We actually don't know. There is no real channel in which a person goes to apply for this license. You can't just Google Singapore, how to be a sex worker in Singapore. There is no information available online. The process is not easy and it is not publicly available. So outside of if you're operating outside of the licensed brothels, of which, as you can see earlier, was only 10% of the sex industry exists inside the regulated brothels. You are subjected to raids, and when you are subjected to raids, you will be subjected to newspaper reportings. And I think this is something that you can see all over Asia and probably all over the world. Whenever they conduct vice raids, raids on sex workers, they would take photographs of sex workers and they will publish it online just to show, And we've been trying to get the police to stop doing this, but they do take photographs of the condoms that are being distributed to the sex workers, and they use it as evidence that they are doing sex work. And this is in the context of a KTV. So we also asked sex workers how they feel about these photos, and they feel that it's very, this particular worker shared that she felt that it was very vulgar and explicit, and that the police should actually contact sex workers and ask for consent before such pictures are printed. She says that prostitution in Singapore is not illegal, but we are caught because we do not have documentation. But if I do not have documentation, why can't they enable me to apply for it? So in the work that I've done at Project X, we've definitely seen sex workers come to us and say they thought they were coming to Singapore to do legal sex work in the regulated brothels, but that they found out that they've been scammed. Some random internet people say, oh yeah, pay me $5,000, I would get you the yellow card. But when they get here, they realize that they're working on the streets or working out of illegal brothels. And in cases like that, we've brought some of these cases to the police, but unfortunately, usually scammers don't make it easy for you to prove that you've been scammed. That's how scamming works. We've had people deported and criminalized even though they were victims of scams. So just more. Okay, so some difficulties faced by sex workers. I think I don't need to belabor many of these points. I'll just very quickly highlight some of these things. So abuse by clients. So clients actually know that if they are engaging in undocumented and irregular, undocumented sex worker, they know that they have the upper hand. And this is something that we've been trying very hard to tell the police that, some of these men specifically target undocumented workers because they know that the undocumented workers won't dare to go to the police to report crimes against them. So some of the issues that sex workers face include non-payment of service, sexual violence, so the forceful removal of condom or the unconsensual removal of condom, as well as rape. The coercion or the influence to use drugs. There are documented cases of unfair treatment by the police. So there was a period of time in Singapore where police actually, after arresting sex workers, they would force them to undergo STI and HIV testing. And from what we understand, not everyone understands why their blood was drawn in the police station. In fact, recently in the last couple of months, one of our peer educators came to me, and she's Thai, and she said, I was arrested and they drew my blood. And I was like, why did they draw your blood? She's like, I don't know. And I'm like, why didn't you ask? She's like, I've been arrested. Why would I ask? So yeah, that's it sets the tone between the relationship of the police and sex workers. And we've also had cases where police officers use Google Translate to take statements. I think this was particularly the case. The case that I heard was of a Portuguese-speaking sex worker. But the police does have quite a number of Vietnamese and Thai speakers right now. Exploitation by pimps or bosses. There have been a couple of convicted cases of human trafficking into especially nightclubs in Singapore. The latest one was of a couple of Bangladeshi hostesses who were then forced to provide sexual services and were not paid their salaries. So that's definitely an issue that is still that is happening and is very pertinent right now. Debt bondage is also a reason why people get trapped in the industry. So stigma and discrimination, intimate partner violence, family violence, intra-community violence are some of the issues. But very specifically, for migrant sex workers, and especially undocumented migrant sex workers, is this lack of access to information, right? I think we have tried our best as an organization to provide information in multiple languages, but I think one thing that people don't realize is that a lot of sex workers don't think to Google help for sex workers. It is not, I think for example, for domestic workers, if they face any difficulties, if their employers don't pay them, if their employers are violent towards them, they know that they can Google and helplines would appear. But sex workers, knowing that they're undocumented, knowing that they probably exist in legal gray areas, do not think that this is something that they can Google information for. And so lack of access to information is an issue. And then if there is information out there, it might not be in the language that they speak. Lack of access to labor rights. So as I mentioned, they were not there to go to the police or to the authorities. Lack of trust for anyone except perhaps their pimps. And I think this is an issue that we're trying to tell the police we need to shift the trust, right? If sex workers trust their pimps and their exploiters more than they trust the police, then there is a problem. Even for us, when we go out and we distribute condoms or we distribute other things and we talk to the sex workers or entertainment workers, they might be like, they would look to their pimps. They'll be like, can I talk to this person, right? Or sometimes the pimps will intervene and be like, don't, these are Singaporeans and they would, arrest you or they might report you to the police. And so don't talk to them. So there's this disempowerment and absolute disenfranchisement that's faced by migrant sex workers and specifically undocumented migrant sex workers. I say this, but actually we know of migrant sex workers in the licensed brothels who are also afraid to speak up. So we've had, especially boyfriends, the boyfriends of these sex workers. They're not supposed to have boyfriends, but all of them have boyfriends. That's just the way things work. And so the boyfriends will message Project X and they'll be like, hey, my girlfriend, she works in a licensed brothel. She wants to go home, but she doesn't dare to talk to her boss, right? And so sometimes bosses hold a small amount of money, whether it's a couple $1,000s to ensure compliance, or the bosses might hold their passports. And so they feel like if they spoke up, that they might jeopardize their money, or they might fall into the bad books of people in power. So there's this disenfranchisement that sort of clouds their experiences. I have 36 seconds left. Okay, I think, so I'll just maybe end quite quickly. This is just a public advisory given by the Ministry of Health in Singapore to avoid casual sex or sex with sex workers. And this is something we hear every year whenever they report on the statistics of HIV in Singapore. And sex workers almost always get the bad rap, right? They are always blamed for spreading disease. I think I've covered sort of the work that we do in Project X. So we don't just do the condom distribution, but we also do casework, legal support, public education. The Instagram account is very powerful for us to just change hearts and minds about sex work. So apart from distributing condoms, we also have cases. Okay, I will end here. Please follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much.